we know that they also look extremely different from the tall gray. Some of them even look somewhat reptilian in nature. And so it's almost like it has to be a mixture of both. It has to be both demonically inspired. They also have to be some type of different factions or different speciations, I would say, of these creatures and specimens that we describe as aliens, or different speciations.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Speaking of wrestling, what's your intro music?
We didn't start the fire.
That's what you'd come into?
It was always burning since the days of Mount Hermon. We didn't start the fire. Right?
You wouldn't come into Time Cop?
We could not this week.
Dude, I would. I'd come into Time Cop and I'd come out of the middle of the ring with like a fog machine.
Oh,
like
you're talking about
Undertaker.
I thought you were talking about this episode intro.
No, I'm talking about like if you were a wrestler and you had intro music, what would you come out to?
I'd probably come out to that.
A Time Cop with fog and like do turn the lights out like you're the Undertaker.
I'd come out with something 80s.
Dude, this would be like BlurryCon. We're just gonna come out. We're gonna come out of the DeLorean, you and I. Fog machine going. Doing full on neon 80s mullets. Freaking glasses.
Or a telephone booth, one of the two.
Like Walkman. We're going with like the old yellow Walkman.
Dude, well, Blurry Creatures has gotten so blurry. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, Luke. Here we are.
Here we are.
If you'd like to sponsor this show, you can go to blurrycreatures.com/members. Become a member of the show. That's how we do it here on Blurry Creatures. You get access to lots of things. We got a ton of community groups. We've got Telegram, Discord, Facebook group. You get early access to shows. You get exclusive episodes. We do monthly members chats, and sometimes we do live chats where you can interact with our guests directly through Discord and YouTube. So, if you like what you hear and you want to help us make more content, because we spend a lot of time making this show, go to blurrycreatures.com/members. Become a member of the show. Let's get King Cat on this one. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, man. What's going on?
What's going on, man?
What's up, guys?
Pleasure, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man.
It's a pleasure. Listen, I found out about your podcast and I said, man, I gotta come on these guys' podcast.
Dude, let's go.
Yeah, we love it, man. We thanks for sharing a bunch of our stuff on Instagram. We have a lot of mutual friends in this space, and it's funny in these days of just you kind of make contact with other truth speakers and seekers, and it's just this network of people. It's really fun.
Yeah. I mean, when I found out that you guys pretty much cover a lot of the same topics I do, I said, man, these guys are doing it right, and we do share the same mutual friends on IG, and so I think what God is doing right now is a lot of people have a thirst for the obvious supernatural that's going on, but there's really no biblical premise for it. And so people are kind of like jumping to and fro. They're going everywhere trying to find an answer. And like the Bible is very clear about a lot of these things that are happening. And so it's fun to watch things happening at lightning break speed, like they're happening right now. But also at the same time, just finding a place just to just freely talk about what the church is afraid to talk about or doesn't know about, or they're just straight up, they just don't have context, right? And so then God lifts up people like you and odd people like me to just bring it to the forefront and just to give people a place just to sit down, listen, and to just jump off of ideas. And it's just great. I'm happy. I
love it.
I think you made a great point though too. The church has completely failed in addressing a lot of these things, and yet all you got to do is open up, especially the end of the Bible. The beginning and the end. The beginning and the end of the Bible have a lot of what's going on very much there. And because the church hasn't, say 90%, now we do have some pastors on here, I would say, like Doug Van Dorn and our friends down the street here at Conduit Church, Nate. Dude, actually, I met those guys this last weekend. It was phenomenal. But like they are addressing the things, and I don't think there is a better time for the church to step in. And yet I feel like there's a reticence. And I think honestly, my opinion, this is what I talked to some of the guys about, is that the church has become so corporatized that it operates as a business, and they're very worried and very about offending the people that put money in the plate.
And that also plays a part into woke culture, because woke culture played a huge part into political correctness to the point where I would say that topics like this, like fallen angels, aliens, UFOs, Bigfoot, this would be considered taboo topics, right? Like they're not politically correct to talk about in church because it has nothing to do with the gospel. Well, the gospel is very supernatural. So how can you say like these concepts have nothing to do with the gospel when it has everything to do with the gospel? I mean, Jesus came in the flesh. I mean, that wasn't a natural thing for him to come. That was a supernatural occurrence. It was a supernatural event.
An immaculate conception and a resurrection on both bookends. There's nothing normal about that. But we've normalized it all. It's become like we've neutered the Bible, and so people are like, that's But hey, alien talk or demonic or supernatural is out of bounds. You're like, we're talking about God incarnate.
I even think some of the supernatural stuff is just getting downplayed more and more and more. You see these stats and you see these interviews that people do that say, how much of the supernatural stories in the Bible do you believe? And it seems like either people are moving away, either you're believing all of it or you're believing none of it. And then you're rationalizing it, you're buying into these lies of Christ consciousness and all this other new age way of looking at it instead of Christ as the Son of God, the creator.
Right. That's it. You said the right word, rationalize. And I was having this conversation with a couple of my friends a couple of weeks ago, and I said that the ill condition and the mindset of the church today is that we have hyper intellectualized the gospel, and we have completely divorced it from its supernatural encounters and its supernatural definitions and its just supernatural meanings, that when people have conversations about God, it's devoid of who he really is by his nature. By his nature, he is otherworldly. He is supernatural. And so I think what is going to be forced to happen, especially with this generation, and this generation is like, they are obsessed with the supernatural, like in a way where other generations haven't been obsessed with. And when I mean obsessed, I mean like, if you look at the Pulitzer stats, witchcraft and witches in general are at an all-time high. Like they're coming from the church. They're coming from the church. The massive numbers of kids today who are leaving the church and entering into witchcraft is astronomical. The numbers are astronomical. The statistics are crazy. And I just can't see how, especially today in today's environment, where we have shows like, or movies like Twilight, or shows like Stranger Things. You have shows like that are specifically targeted towards the young audience. Whereas you're like, okay, well, where's the church? Like, where's the body of Christ? You're like, why aren't we in these spheres talking about shows like Stranger Things? Because Stranger Things is a huge show. Like, it's not a small show. It's a huge show. And they're tackling conversations about the demonic realm or the upside down, or like concepts that are obviously scriptural, that the church is just like, no, let's just preach the gospel. This is gospel.
Well, the church isn't providing any anything supernatural for that thirst for it. And so by default, people look outside of it. They look to the New Age, they look to, or they look to straight to witchcraft because, man, that's the wrong way to tap into the spirit realm, but that is a way. And people it's interesting. People are looking for that. I think people are finally waking up and starting to have their eyes open to see what's going on around them as far as and even the agenda to push them toward the darkness as opposed to the light. And the church isn't helping. I mean, for the vast majority, I don't want to paint every church with a broad brush, but for the vast majority of the churches, I think is spiritually bankrupt.
Well, I think what happened with this generation is like they could control the narrative until just a few years ago, right? So we kind of grew up with this controlled narrative where they were the gatekeepers of knowledge and technology and all these other things. And now this younger generation is starting to see videos of UFOs, Bigfoot, whatever it is that wakes them up. And if they don't have a foundation of Christ, then they just get spiritual, but they don't have any foundation of, well, who is the creator of all of this? And how do you filter all of it through that paradigm? So it's like our generation that's the slow ones, and we're going back, and people our age are like, I never heard about the Nephilim before. Like, and we've been in the church 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, and we've never heard something that every single ancient person would have known about. And it's mind-boggling. But
Hey, we came out the gate already. Do you want to do a proper intro,
let's
Nate?
Go.
Get this thing started. We didn't even introduce anybody, really. We just got after it.
That's how it goes.
Yeah,
Kevin, welcome to the show. I don't know how much of your name you want to put out there. We can just shout you out as your Instagram handle. Welcome to the show, King Cat.
Yeah.
A lot of people who listen to our show were like, they kept messaging us to have you on, and you have a big platform. And we've had people like Eyes on the Right on the show as well.
I love Eyes on the Right, man.
And you guys are truth seekers out there, and you're educating people on this, all the things going on. And I know you guys tackle like more political stuff, and we kind of stay in the creature space. And the way we introduce everyone on our shows, we ask them the quintessential question is, Kevin, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? What do you think Bigfoot is? And that's how we do it. That's how we do it here.
You got to start somewhere.
Bigfoot has to be some type of either humanoid or Neph. And I say Nephilim because it's obviously not of human origins. And usually what I tell anybody is when it comes to like creatures like Nephilim or like angels or aliens or reptilians, if you want to get into that, the idea is that it would have to be a Nephilim. He would have to be a Nephilim. That's just my assumption. I could be very wrong, but he's definitely of supernatural origins, that's for sure.
Well, I love it. Welcome to the show. How did you get baptized into the blurry space? How did you start to see some of these things?
I would say I grew up relatively in a space where the supernatural was not a weird or odd thing. It wasn't out of the ordinary. I grew up in a very West Indian household, and so the idea of like supernatural occurrences, things happening, dreams, visions. So I knew the supernatural was real, right? And so I grew up in a family heavily involved in some type of witchcraft or the occult. And so I grew up in faith, but not really tying two and two together. I knew God was supernatural. I knew he was mighty. I knew he was the being of all beings. But there was no real true understanding on connecting like, okay, there's God and there's also something that is completely devoid of all goodness. And it was only until I probably was in my 20s that I really started to seek like with true intention on what the truth was. And so like we started before we opened up was this generation, specifically like Gen Z, millennials, they're incredibly intuitive when it comes to the supernatural. We're talking about new agers. We're talking about people who are involved in like sage and opening up their third eye, astral projection, all that other extra stuff. And for me, I never divulged into that, but I knew a lot of my friends, a lot of people who I grew up with were involved in that type of stuff. And so it was only until I gave my life to Christ, I really understood that the death, burial, and resurrection, even Jesus's coming, like we were talking about before, was supernatural nature. Like there is nothing natural about Jesus coming in the flesh dying on the cross was natural because he had to die. But the resurrection, that's supernatural. That there's nothing natural about the resurrection at all. And so the Bible is an ancient supernatural book filled with ancient supernatural encounters. And when I had that light bulb experience, when I read Genesis 6 about the Nephilim and the flood and the fallen angels and all this other stuff, I'm like, the Bible is like the book for supernatural. Like, if you want supernatural encounters, you want a supernatural understanding, it's the Bible. You got to go to the Bible. It's the most ancient book of supernatural encounters. And so that opened up a world of just extra knowledge and questions for me, where if the Nephilims are real, okay, then fallen angels are real, then these ideas of reptilians and Bigfoot and aliens, they also are real because they're supernatural in nature. And so the best context I tell everyone for understanding the supernatural is the biblical context, and it's the scriptures, it's the Bible. And so my journey really was, I would just say, like, supernatural in nature. And so And
we've talked a bit about that. I mean, Nate, I would say, like, especially people like Mike Heiser in this space.
Michael Heiser.
But just talking about the idea that, like, the Bible was written by ancient Hebrews, that there was no separation of natural and supernatural. Like the understanding of the even the first century church and everything before that in the Old Testament in times of Moses, and was that supernatural was a reality, a very real reality. And yet here we are, like, post Enlightenment, post the academic revolution, and we live in a time where those things have been separated, fully separated, and they were never meant to be. And I think that's maybe been the biggest thing for me in this journey through 100 and something episodes of our show, is waking up to the understanding that you need to read the Bible like to the audience it was written to and written by, like, and their understanding of the spirit realm and the supernatural and spiritual things, and even things like Enoch was a very real reality. One we're very much divorced from in this age of enlightenment, whatever you want to call it.
It's hard too, because I mean, like, a lot of the subjects we get into, it's like we've all been brainwashed for so long through these lenses of, we read the Bible via our science lens and the modern day narrative, and we think we're reading it through an open mind, reading what the verses say, and then you realize how much modern society has influenced the way we read the scriptures versus, you almost have to go back and just open your mind up to the fact that I believe all these stories happened. And I think if you read it like a modern day person, you almost can't read it that way, because you have to go, really, a talking snake? Really, a talking donkey? These things didn't happen. And so then you have to sort of change the scriptures, change the stories. And then we have a lot of churches these days that's what they do. They just change it all.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think one of the reasons that is because of apologetics. And so to find an answer to give for your faith has become, find a rational answer to give to an atheist so that they can accept the answer and then therefore come to faith. Well, if I have to divorce the biblical text from its supernatural encounters, I'm doing a much more disservice and actually just telling them the flat out truth. And I really do think that, and I grew up in the apologetic stage listening to William Lane Craig, Ravi Zacharias, and the likes, and what ends up happening is that you end up loving the educational, rational, finding an argument, battling the atheist side, and you completely forget that the entire Bible is about a supernatural encounter with God, having a supernatural understanding that God created the world not by your logic, not by rationality. He created the world by the power of his word. There was nothing rational or logical really to our coherence, trying to rely on our cognitive faculties to read the Bible and say, okay, this makes sense. 2/3 of the Bible doesn't make sense if you really think about it.
I would even argue that the New Testament, you can't take the Holy Spirit out of the New Testament. You get past the Gospels, you can't, and then you got to talk to, in a scientific paradigm, talk to people about how there's an indwelling of the Holy Spirit, part of the Trinity of God in all of us, and you go that you can't. How do you? You can't separate it. So
you can't. And that's one of the reasons why topics like the topics that we cover consistently, or topics we cover on the podcast consistently, are so important right now, especially for those who are struggling with faith or coming into faith and have had, new age supernatural encounters, and they have no context for it. Because what that ends up happening, like we were talking before, is that you'll end up going to everything else but coming back to the God of Scripture. And without him, you're going to get lost. And without him, you're going to find yourself stumbling in the dark, when really the light of Christ shows you that, okay, the supernatural encounters, the dreams, the visions, the issues of fallen angels, the issues of aliens, the issues that you're having in your new age experiences, these things matter, and they matter in a much larger context, because really what it comes down to is it's a fight for your soul, and the enemy wants to do whatever it takes to destroy not just your logic and rationality, but to destroy the encounter that you can have with God through his Spirit, which is supernatural. Being born again is supernatural.
I love it. I love it. Yep. It's funny, because one of the things we do is we try to start people out with their rationality on our show and say, look, okay, you can look at the physical evidence for a creature like Bigfoot, right? We bring on Dr. Jeff Meldrum and say, look, we have the cast, we have the footprints. This thing really exists. It's there, but also you can't capture the thing, and the thing phases in and out, and the thing is associated with orbs and all kinds of supernatural stuff. So, and we do the same thing with the giants. We bring on people who've excavated the mounds or have the bones dug up in their backyard, or thousands and thousands of documented cases and newspaper clippings, and we bring those people on and appeal to your rationality. Like, look, the Genesis 6 narrative is true. We look at it from 50 different angles. Yeah. But at first we start with the rationale just to get people like, oh, there is evidence for Bigfoot. There is evidence for the ancient giants. History's been a lie. And then you slowly, it's like you go back to God, because you wake up to the fact that, I've been reading this wrong my whole life. And Bigfoot is this weird gateway drug that we use on our show. So that's what we do.
Love it.
But it's great, man. It's great to hear your story. Today we want to talk about some of the fallen angels and the technology. And I know that you probably get stuff sent to you all day long, every day, like we do. What are some things that you think are left out of the conversation in these spaces, or some of the things that are passionate that get you up in the morning, get you excited, and get you wanting to post and educate people on that?
Man, it would definitely have to be all things pertaining to like UFOs and aliens. And I think it's those things excite me specifically because, one, the church is almost entirely mute in the conversation when it comes to like UFOs and aliens and whatnot. And so I found myself in kind of like a particular specific odd position, because when I first started speaking out, it was specifically just about what was going on culturally and politics, denouncing BLM and their wokeness, denouncing what was going on with the elections, and talk about what's going on with the elections. But then my heart has always been for the church, for the gospel, and to amplify the gospel, of course, and to just remind people, hey, all of this is pointing towards the fact that Jesus is coming back. I remember the first time I spoke about aliens, it was kind of like it was just a news thread. It was just an article about Space Force that Trump was pushing before he had left office. And that kind of died down. And I remember sharing that article on my IG stories, and I said, oh, well, this is obviously going to make way for the coming of aliens. And I remember my response was probably 10 or 15 times more engaging when I spoke about aliens. And I said, well, why the heck is that? I thought I was just like the only weird one in the political sphere who was talking about those things, but I realized I'm not. If you guys pay attention to Tucker Carlson, Tucker has a segment on his show specifically dedicated to aliens. Like, he would go into like a whole spiel talking about what was going on. He'll have his, his monologue, his most famous monologues for the first 10, 15 minutes of the show. And then once or twice a week, he'll have like a segment on just aliens. And it goes completely over people's heads. Like, no one ever really talks about it. But I remember the first time I saw it, I said, why the heck is no one talking about the fact that Tucker Carlson is talking about aliens? I mean, it's Tucker Carlson. Everyone's talking about Tucker Carlson. But I remember the more I engaged and looked into it, I said, well, if Fox News is mentioning aliens and we're now talking about disclosure of aliens to the point where Congress just a week and a half ago had their very first disclosure meeting in over, I think, 50 years.
Yeah.
This is something we can no longer ignore because the Vatican, I remember reading Exo Vaticanus by Tom Horn. The Vatican, as we know, has always been pushing the narrative of aliens from jump. And their whole idea is that when aliens come on the scene, we're gonna be forced to speak about theology in a very different way. Now that'll change everything. And so I remember when I first read the book and when I first heard Tom Horn and Timothy and Steve Quayle and et cetera, when I heard all these guys start talking about the whole idea of aliens and UFOs and disclosure and the fallen angels and all that other jazz, I said, well, this isn't something that we could ignore politically. And this is sure as heck something we can't ignore when it comes to the church and this next generation that's coming up, because we're in the middle of the most deceiving times in human history. And the enemy wants nothing more than to get as many souls corrupted and perverted and deceived as he possibly can. And I said it would be a disservice for me to share what I share politically and not share stuff pertaining to aliens and UFOs and like, what does the Bible have to say about that? Or what about fallen angels? What about fallen angel technology? Are UFO fallen angels technology? So it's those type of stuff that people were really interested in. And I realized, okay, everyone's not just interested in what's going on politically with, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, and woke culture and transgenderism and LGBTQ stuff. All that stuff, all those talking stuff is great because it's happening every day. But what do we have to say about aliens? What do we have to say about UFOs? What are we going to say about the biblical interpretation of these things? Are we just going to let it fly by as if it's not happening? Or are we going to actually engage with the culture on this topic? Because we're going to have no choice but to, because it's happening so frequently every day that it would be a disservice, like I said before, for us to not talk about it. And so when I landed upon your podcast, I said, man, I know these guys. They're just as weird. They're just as weird as I am. They're just as weird as I am. And so when I first saw you guys, I said, I don't care how big or small, I'm like, I need to share with the rest of my peeps who follow me, because the more people know that there are other people who are having these conversations and they're not afraid to have it, the better it would be to equip the whole church and to equip this generation and the younger generation. Because honestly, there aren't a lot of people who are doing what we're doing, who are doing what you guys are doing. And as you can see, God is going to continue to bless it, because people are going to be even more inquisitive and questions are going to be thrown at everywhere, every direction. And people are going to try and find answers. And this podcast is like an answer, because it's like, okay, so they're talking about really odd stuff. They're talking about Bigfoot and transhumanism and aliens and fallen angels. Like, what the heck is all this stuff? Tartaria, what the heck is all this stuff? And it gives people hope, because it's like, okay, finally I have a place where I can just sit down and binge listen or binge watch and everything will go great. So it's yeah. I don't even know if
Kevin, I got a question. I want an opinion on this.
Yeah.
Why do you think it seems to be just like Tucker and Fox that are talking about aliens, and it seems devoid? I mean, obviously, almost the entirety of the news cycle is filled with political stuff. And that's kind of where everything is gone. But it seems like, aside from a few one-off articles from like New York Post, where they're talking about they're talking about orbs following battleships and stuff like that. I think I see some of that. I feel like maybe just there's very few, if any, chatter about that outside of Tucker. And and I want to know why you think that is, because I know that on our show, Nate, we've had people put forward their thoughts on the alien and what this narrative agenda is, and how this, there's a lot of thoughts on how this will play out. And I think we've talked to Tim Alberino, and we've talked to, I'm blanking here, we've talked to a number of Marzulli. We've talked to a bunch of folks about Doug Van Dorn, about how the alien narrative will play out and how that's going to affect what we see in biblical prophecy. But it's, to me, it's like this, and we talked to Tim about this just last week. This should be the biggest story there is. Yeah. Like, Congress just held hearings and nobody seems to care.
Yeah, no one talked about it.
No one talks about it.
And I think the reason for that is the one thing that we're seeing that's going on right now when it comes to the WHO, the wacky tacky, you know, that, and it's control. It's control. The one thing about Bible prophecy is that you can't control Bible prophecy. And what we're seeing going on right now with the narrative is all narratives are about just one thing, and that's control. And so what they're trying to do with this, with the news outlets, and especially with Tucker, is that they're trying to control the narrative. They want to control how the information comes out, when it comes out, and how to prevent people from actually thinking very deeply and innately and contemplating about the issue of how a alien encounter is going to drastically change the fabric of mankind. And so they don't want the information to come out and for people to start thinking for themselves the way that they ought to. Instead, what they want to do is they want to slowly drip the information out, word by word, letter by letter, sentence by sentence, year by year, to the point where it will happen all at once. And I really do just honestly believe all it is about is just straight up control. And so if they can control not just the narrative, but if they control how it comes out, the public eye and those who are, I want to say, very ignorant about the topic, they either wouldn't know what to do, or they would be so besides themselves with the information that they'll be stuck in anxiety and fear. And so honestly, I literally just believe it's just specifically about control.
Yeah, it's hard because even the guys like Tucker, I think some people still have sort of this old view of like, there's the right and there's the left.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, no, they're all owned.
Yeah.
They're all owned. And someone put a gun to their head somewhere and said, this is how you're going to lay it out. This is how the information's going to come out. And, you know, because it doesn't feel like things just come out anymore. It's like, you know, and that's why the left is freaking out about Elon Musk, because he's kind of, even though who knows where Elon's heart is, he's just one guy grabbing a major news outlet.
He's disrupting.
And they can't have that because they have control of all these outlets. And so he's just pissing people off because it's like, well, now he can say things and do things and people are listening to it. And we don't have the ability to control this. And I think, you're right. And Tim's obsession, Tim Alvarino, is, you know, he grew up in the giant space and the Nephilim space, but he seems to have migrated towards alien disclosure. And we were talking about doing a live event with him at L.A. Marzulli because of this meeting with Congress, that we need to do some sort of, like, if they're not going to wake up the church, then maybe all of us can get together. We can go live on all of our social medias and try to tell people this is one of the most historical things to happen in this space in 50 years. Wake up. Like, and if you don't know what's going to come down, you're going to be deceived. And we make memes and stupid stuff on our channels. Like we made this meme where, you know, the kids doing the Weezer cover and the keyboard falls down.
Yeah.
We did one where, like, UFO disclosure, the church, you know, modern church, and it just falls over because that's what's going to happen. You know, people are going to leave the faith in droves because they're not going to be able to make sense of quote unquote aliens.
But Kevin, I think to your point, that's part of the design, right? Is that you can control people with fear. We saw it happen in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And the more this leaks out slowly, the less people that are awake to it, the more an actual encounter, if that's what we believe is coming, will be shocking and scary. And that's how you control. You shock and you subdue with fear.
So why say anything at all? Why say anything at all then?
I think, well, for one, we're compelled to. Like, from everything that we know, it's almost as if, like, we're big bubbles that are about to pop. You know, and so, like, the more you know, the more you realize, I can't keep this to myself. Right. And so it's like that was the only reason I spoke out in the first place, is because I realized what was going on and I understood the end game was deception. Like, that's really what everything that's going on right now, from, like, whether we're talking about MK Ultra, whether we're talking about some type of government controlled agency or narrative, it's all about control. And most importantly, it's about trying to prevent the truth from coming out. And so like I said, what podcasts like this do, and what I do and what many others do, is we're seeing the end game, and the end game is deception. And their end game of deception is going to have many moving parts. And the aliens are one of the main moving parts. And so if we don't sound the alarm, the last thing I want to do is stand before the Lord and have to give an account. I don't ever want to stand before. That's one thing that terrifies me, is having to stand before him and having to give an account for why I didn't do A or B.
Yep.
And I don't care whether people call me crazy or silly, or I'm just out of the ordinary. I'd rather be crazy and tell you the truth than be silent and keep these things to myself and have to give an account when I'm standing before the King of Kings. And I would much rather be labeled all types of names in the book. Call me conspiracy theorist all you want. Don't care. I'd much rather be truthful to you and tell you the truth than keep it to myself.
Well, it's the Alex Jones paradigm, right? Like, you're like, dude, put $1 in the Alex Jones was correct or was right jar. And the further we get down, we're barreling down, the years here. It's just like, man, the dude is kind of crazy, but he's right about a lot of things, right? And I saw a video from 2003 the other day where he was talking about what's happening right now with the World Economic Forum and the New World Order and what they want to do and how they're going to do it with diseases and all. And you're like, dude, this guy was saying this in 2003, and people said he was, out of his mind and bonkers. And here we are. And I mean, that's a little bit of a reach, but I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that what we're seeing now, Kevin, and I want to get your take on this too. And I think, Nate, you were kind of talking about it for a second, is that this is something that can no longer be contained by the government. Everyone has cameras and video cameras on their phones now, which means that the days of being able to keep this behind the curtain, per se, are over. And so while I don't think they're going to come out and just be like, hey, all this is real and this is what's going on, they're going to be still cloak and dagger. They have to at least stay in front of it, because there's no way to stop the train now, because people are seeing things. People are taking videos are getting leaked out of the military, and they can't stay silent, because they stay silent, it's complicity. And at the same time, they want to stay in front of it because you can't control the narrative without being in front of it. So my question for you is, we started this little part of this discussion about fallen angels and fallen angel technology. Like, what are your thoughts on the alien paradigm and in context of what's happening now? And obviously we know that you think like we do through a biblical narrative. Like, how do you see this playing out? What do you think? Because we have a number of guests on our show that, like, all the way from L.A. Marzulli says all this stuff is completely demonic and the Greys are meat suits, to the Alberinos that say, like, there's different factions and they're actually extraterrestrials, and yes, fallen angels are out there with fallen angel crafts. And we can't say one thing or the other is correct because we don't know, but curious because your pulse, I would say you're someone who has your finger on the pulse of politics right now in this country, but also uniquely have your finger on the pulse of the generations and what they think and what the threads are. And I'd love to get your take on personally, and then what you think is being played out.
I think honestly, it's a mixture of both. And I think that's how the sweet spot of deception works. You'll probably never really have your hand until the very end on what exactly is going on.
Right.
And I remember listening to Timothy and L.A. Marzulli on the whole perspective of what was going on with the alien issue. And L.A. Marzulli had mentioned, and I agree with 100%, on why we can no longer contain what's going on, is that Roswell, which was the very first, I would say, encounter that had been public for everyone to see and understand, that was 50 plus years ago. And so everyone who was in charge of Roswell has died and gone on. And so this next generation of those who were, I would say, in charge of what was going on with the information at Roswell, they're just letting the information out because they realize it's insurmountable at this point. We cannot contain all the information. We cannot contain all the footage that we have that contained in Roswell. And plus, on top of that, all the other issues that we have going on with, whether or not that's aircrafts, whether or not that's footage, whether or not that's people actually being abducted, that we have information about. And so the the abduction stories are also insurmountable. You can't stop someone from sharing their testimony about what they encountered, having a paranormal experience or an out of the ordinary experience with something that is a completely different sentient being from a human being. And so I do believe what we're seeing is a fraction of both. We're seeing just the information being so insurmountable it can no longer be contained. And we're seeing people who have actually been abducted sharing their stories with regular people, regular random people. And you have a mixture of people who are willing to listen and a mixture of people who are kind of pushing the information back because it's just too much. And so, I mean, how do you explain someone telling you about being abducted or telling you about their encounter with something that they could hardly explain themselves, let alone explaining it to someone else who has never even so much as understood the concept of alien beings or sentient beings that are not human, right? And so I do believe what we're seeing in the sphere is that we're seeing a whole slew of the information of Roswell on top of aliens, on top of alien abductions, on top of people having these encounters, and it coming out into the forefront, specifically politically, and it can't be contained anymore. And also, to answer your other question about fallen angels, et cetera, I believe we're just at a point where the identity per se about aliens is going to be even more confusing by design. And because if they can make it confusing by design, it's going to be very hard for us to pinpoint what is what and what is what exactly. And so I also agree with both Timothy and LA that it is demonic in nature, because we know for a fact that Christians who have had some type of alien abduction or alien abduction story, that they can allow the abduction to cease by calling on the name of Jesus in their mind of minds, right? In their subconscious minds, rebuking the experience. And so that is also a case that is very true. But also at the same time, we know that there has to be different factions or different speciations of aliens because of just as many different encounters and the many different descriptions that people have had about aliens. So we know that aliens are not just the tall grays. We know that they also look extremely different from the tall grays. Some of them even look somewhat reptilian in nature. And so it's almost like it has to be a mixture of both. It has to be both demonically inspired. They also have to be some type of different factions or different speciations, I would say, of these creatures and specimens that we describe as aliens, or different speciation. And so, honestly, I think the conversations can be so rich as we move on, because we're getting to a point in human history on the prophetic timeline where everything that's in the dark has to come to light. And so God is almost as if the Lord is specifically giving the devil a time clock. Well, I'm giving you this amount of time for this to come out, and it's going to come out. It has to come out. My people must know before I return, before I send my son. And so I don't care what happens. The amount of disclosure, the amount of things that they've been trying to hide for years on top of years, this is the time where it has to be revealed. And I do believe that as much as they're going to try and control the narrative, it's going to fail horribly, because the narrative right now is crumbling before our eyes, mainly because of social media. You can't contain a group of people in their homes and not expect them to be online. That's one of the ideas of the whole World Economic Forum and the whole pandemic that just backfired. It was like you thought that you can keep people enclosed in their homes for a large period of time and not expect them to question or not expect them to think for themselves. So we're seeing the plans of the wicked and the schemes of the wicked backfire extraordinarily. And I believe we're living probably one of the greatest times in human history, where it's just like we just have to just look at the news every day and just like, oh yeah, I knew that was gonna happen.
Well, it's like, a lot of people say we're at the end of the age. We're coming to the end of the age, and one of the things that I think a lot of people, there's a couple things I want to say. One is that people, they think demons and demonic are the same thing, and they're not. Demons are disembodied spirits that are trapped here.
Yeah.
You know, the things flying around in craft are not, they're not, you know, they are not disembodied spirits. They are actual entities, like you were saying, speciation of something else. And in the ancient days, you know, the Bible is a story of war of gods.
Yeah.
You know, God says, have no other gods before me.
Yeah.
There were other gods that were actually real. It's not a metaphor. It's not an idea. It's not a stone tablet. It's an actual entity inhabiting whatever it is. And they were in competition with each other.
Yep.
And I think when Jesus says, you know, it'll be like the days of Noah again, I think what we've all been lulled to sleep the last couple hundred years, because I don't think ancient people, they had either a polytheistic worldview or they served the God of Israel, and they understood there's one true God that's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords.
Yeah.
And there was no this other thought, well, you guys are all crazy. You're all like, these things don't exist. We live in this age of agnosticism. And it's like, no. Either my God's going to show up or your God's going to show up.
Yep.
There is no third opinion.
Yep.
And I think that this younger generation is starting to smell that, like, the world is not the way they told us. This evolution is BS.
Yep.
You can look at the pyramids, you can look at all this other stuff, and they're starting to get into New Age ideas because they realize whatever Satan has sold us the last 150 years is just, it's almost like they wanted us stupid. So when the aliens show up, we buy it because we're just so
bingo.
We're so spiritually neutered that we're just going to take that cake.
Yep, bingo. And I have to, we would have to go all the way back into like the hyper rationalism age, back to the scientific revolution, and even a little bit before that, where apologetics start, like we were talking about before, apologetics started to get very, very popular. And when you go back to the beginning of apologetics, you go back to St. Augustine, who really popularized the idea of Genesis 6 being the children of Seth and not right. And so it goes back all the way back even then, where you saw that the church unanimously accepted a different interpretation of the biblical story, of the flood story, of Genesis 6 and onward, to appeal to a new generation that no longer wanted to acknowledge the supernatural elements and the supernatural nature of God. And to come back to what you're saying, I really do believe that we have a great opportunity right now to not reinvent it, but to just bring it back and say, here, this is the actual story. This is exactly what happened. And when you're talking about the gods, when you read Psalms 82, I mean, there's no other way you can see how God was talking to the council of God besides saying, well, who's the Lord talking to here? You know, right. So one of those things where it's like the whole Bible, unless you just want to read it with one eye open, one eye closed, there's no way you can come across that the biblical text has no elements of supernatural encounters or supernatural elements towards it or in it at all. And I really do believe that just the time that we're living in is going to beckon a generation to want the full truth and nothing but the truth. And honestly, I think we're at a prime position to just give them exactly that. I mean, when you look at what's going on in pop culture and the idea of the gods that they serve, they're unashamed and unabashed to tell you, we have no problem doing rituals to Satan. I mean, we were talking about Megan Fox doing, admitting that she does blood rituals with Machine Gun Kelly. So it's like, they're ready. Like, this generation is prime. They're primed to accept, okay, there's got to be some type of evil, malevolent, demonic force to this world. And it has to be biblical. I mean, just the term demonic is a biblical term. Demons, biblical term. So it's like, we're at the precipice right now where the idea of accepting the true biblical narrative is going to be just something that I think we just have to get ready for. We just got to get ready for people to really search out for the truth. And like I said, this podcast does a fantastic job at just prying.
Thanks, man.
I think it's interesting you brought up Augustine, because I think we talk about this all the time, Nate, about how there are no new deceptions, nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And what I think we see continuously, and what I think we're seeing now, is that it's the influence and the incorporating of the political into church, where people bend their faith to please the world instead of bending their faith to please God. and it's really it's the woke thing in a lot of ways. It's taking that into the church to please the culture.
Yeah.
And that's exactly counter to the message of Jesus, right? We're to be, we're not to be of the world, be in the world, but not of the world. And I think honestly, when you're saying this out loud, it makes me start to think about like, man, the devil has the same tricks.
Yeah.
And whether he was doing it to spiritually bankrupt the church through what would happen with some of the church fathers and in changing what was the understanding and the intent of the writers of Genesis, and the explanation of the supernatural in the encounter of Mount Hermon, and even things like the removal of, and we can debate this forever, and it doesn't matter where you land, but sort of we know now because of the Dead Sea Scrolls the importance of Enoch, but the removal of Enoch from the canon and then it being rediscovered in Qumran, and you know all these things, and you're like, well, listen, like a lot of this seems to be intentional, but then you look at now what's happening, and I honestly think the flip side of that is the awakening. Right now we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we know what was going on with the Essenes in Qumran, and we knew that and now we with these texts we know that Jude and Peter were lifting from Enoch, and that Jesus also paraphrased Enoch. And so whether you want to make it canon or not doesn't matter. It matters that it's now available, and now we have some credence to it, right? And so I think it's interesting to watch the same tricks sort of being perpetrated within the church by the darkness, and then. But I think God is starting to, he's allowing, and I think as part of it's the prophecy, he's allowing these breadcrumbs of truth to start to come through in this generation. And I think it ties a bow onto a lot of this stuff too. With we talk about the alien disclosure and the understanding now that the government can't contain this. Our information does not come from newspapers. And if you saw something in the 50s, you could tell your neighbors, you could tell your newspaper, but there was still a matter of control. But now we have a podcast like ours. We have an Instagram account like yours. You have this access to the flow of information that is instantaneous and all-reaching.
Yeah, that's all Heiser says. He says it's not that he comes up with any new ideas. He's like, we just have access to more information.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're living. I was to jump on what you guys are saying. We're living in the next golden age, like right now, and that's a technological golden age where we have information at our fingertips. In 1 second, I can know anything I want to know. And so the issue when it comes to Enoch is that also no longer can be hidden, because what was discovered in the Qumran caves, right besides the Isaiah scrolls, was Enoch. And so we know for a fact that the biblical authors like Jude and Peter and Jesus himself that were drawing from the wisdom of what was found in Enoch, that also can't be ignored. And I really do believe that, as much as we want to ascribe a lot of deception to the devil, there's also a lot of wisdom in what the Lord had did in this hour, because he told Daniel, Daniel, shut up this book, for this is for the generation of the end. So we know for a fact, and that's how Enoch opens up as well. Enoch opens up the exact same way, that this is for the generation of the end. And so it's almost as if, the church, and whether or not the church fathers, they did do some good, quote unquote. I do believe they did a whole lot more bad than good, because it robbed us hundreds and hundreds of years of true, authentic biblical education. And, we have great guys like Dr. Michael Heiser in LA, and Timothy and Thomas Horn and Steve Quill, all these other guys who did their due diligence to help guys like you and me stand and, kind of pretty much stand on their shoulders, so to speak, because we're just living in a time where, although information is at our fingertips, truth is also that much more harder to find, because things are so easy to find now. But deciphering from what we know as information and trying to figure out, okay, well, what's the truth? It helps to have extra sources or extra people who've already done the hard work and the hard digging, so that we can say, okay, this is exactly what happened. Oh, okay, so we understand Genesis 6. Oh, okay, so Enoch is a really important book for this time. And that's another thing. It's funny you bring up Enoch. Anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you have not read Enoch, you should probably try and find yourself to getting it, so that you
first Enoch
1, because we
get a lot of people heckling us about that, on YouTube and stuff.
Same. But it's
like we're Gnostic and we don't actually know Christ.
Yeah, it's really odd and weird, because when you read Enoch 1, the amount of depictions of the Son of Man in it the messianic prophecies of Jesus. It's almost uncanny. And so it's just one of those things where I really do believe if you want to have a true understanding of not just the times that we're living in, but at least a good academic understanding of what Genesis 6 was all about, and then how all of this kind of works itself out, and then what really happened at the fall. And like, I love how Dr. Michael Heiser explains that, Genesis describes a twin fall. It wasn't just the fall of Adam and Eve, it was also the angelic fall. And so it's just, it's one of those things where when people hear it, they're like, what? Like, I didn't know there was a twin fall. Yeah, of course there was. And so, like I said, I do believe we're living in the greatest moment in human history right before the return of the Lord. And we get to see all of these things unravel and unfold. And I do believe that the best is yet to come. And I also strongly believe that we're seeing a deception that we've never seen before. And as long as we continue to just stand firm, fight for the truth, and keep our eyes peeled, we're going to be surprised at how many people not only get saved, but how many people like just truly get born again and they get on fire for Jesus. And, we'll see a true revival in both body and spirit that we've just never seen before.
The harvest.
Yeah.
It's biblical. Yeah.
It's difficult because I think, guys like Augustine, I think in some ways they were deceived because they just didn't know, they didn't have any context to make sense of the stories.
Yeah.
It's almost like, you wake up, if someone just like gave you a snapshot of what a baseball game was 600 years ago, right? You wouldn't have any, you wouldn't know what a double was. What's a double? What's hitting one into the gap?
Yeah.
Right? What's a beanball? You wouldn't know what these terms were unless you were like a baseball nerd. And I think the biblical writers were nerds. They read everything. They knew all the terms. And then you have all these guys in the mid-centuries trying to interpret a world they just don't understand. Like they couldn't get on their phones and be like, dude, did you see this photo of Bigfoot? What is that thing? Like their minds couldn't be expanded beyond just the conversations they were having locally with other nerds, and they couldn't travel around the world instantaneously and put all these things together. And I think the thing about Bigfoot is it's like if you see a Bigfoot and you grow up in the church, you immediately have a paradigm. It busts your paradigm. Just something as simple as seeing. It doesn't have anything to do with God or anything. It's just you see a creature that is not supposed to exist.
Yeah.
It blows everything out of the water. And what the church doesn't realize is people are seeing these creatures.
Yep.
And they're tuning into ancient aliens to get answers for what they see.
Bingo. Oh man, we can talk for hours about how demonstrably destructive ancient aliens has been to this generation, man. I mean, ancient aliens I remember arguing about my dad about the existence of aliens being demonic and him referring to ancient aliens as his reference point for truth. And I would never forget how difficult it was for me at the time. Of course, my dad is like, he's the one who introduced me to like, Timothy and Steve and Thomas Horn, all that other stuff, all those other guys.
Yeah.
He drastically, like radically got changed and saved. But I remember how difficult it was for me to traverse the truth of the deception of ancient aliens, because they present the information in such a way where they're the only primary source and authority on the topic.
Yeah.
And everyone else doesn't know what they're talking about. And so I think that's one of the scary things about ancient aliens is that they have completely hijacked the biblical narrative and just left the church to just chew off of their crumbs that they've left on the floor, that they completely messed up. But it's really interesting you brought up ancient aliens. Completely forgot about them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just people want a spiritual answer, but they don't want to be accountable to anything. And that's exactly what ancient aliens is. It's like we can get spiritual and weird, but we don't have to actually have an accountability to any true research, any true history. And
the interesting part too, Nate, is it's an acknowledgement
of supernatural stuff.
Of all the supernatural stuff. It's just it's a comfortable label
with no education.
And devoid of God.
Completely devoid of God. It's an atheistic look at, and it's interesting because I think you can watch that and flip it all on its head and say, oh man, they're just talking about fallen angels. They're talking about Genesis 6. They're talking about the building of pyramids and temples and all these things that we know have to do with the sons of God.
Yeah,
and the Ben Elohim that fell, and were given in Deuteronomy 32, given dominion over the nations.
What do you think about the nuts and bolts of alien technology? Because that's something that a lot of Christians don't want to acknowledge too. Is that they have technology that's kind of like ours, They're flying around in metallic objects. It's not like it's not just like angels with wings, which is mostly what the church sees, and the Catholic Church, obviously. But these things crash.
Yeah.
And we find their tech, and guys like Bob Lazar, like, not only do we find their tech, we've reverse engineered their tech.
Honestly,
So what do you think about the technology side of the alien phenomena?
I really do think that's probably also part of the oddities of how this deception is working out, because we know by default spiritual beings don't need anything physical to travel, and so I really do believe that what we're seeing when it comes to like alien technology and specifically like UFOs is that we're seeing a mechanism of the natural workings of how they choose to operate, because I really do believe is how they choose to operate here, and restricting, because they are restricted to the natural laws here, as well as them being other out of the ordinary, supernatural. And honestly, the most fascinating thing to me about the alien tech is the fact that from what I understand, we don't know a lot about their tech, besides some of the things that the outlandish ideas that we hear, whether it's being able to fly at supersonic speed, whether it's able to stop at supersonic speed at once, or whether it is to apprehend gravity or completely go through material objects. And so it's one of those things where it's like, for me, I wrap my head around it, but at the same time, I'm like, man, this is so over our heads. Their technology is way ahead of ours. We've hijacked some of their tech. We have taken control of some of their tech, but even to that degree, there's still a lot that we still don't know about their tech, And so I really do believe that what we're seeing right now with alien technology and this fallen angel technology is that as the days go by, I know for certain I'm going to be extremely surprised at some of the things that came on. I remember seeing Joe Rogan's IG page, and he had this reel on, I think it was a drone that traveled from 0 to 200 miles in less than 2 seconds. And I'm sitting here listening to, like, because the minute you play the reel, it goes like, it makes this insane supersonic noise where it's like, if this is a drone, what in the world does fallen angel what in the world can fallen angel technology do? What can this alien technology really do? And so it's just, for me, it's mind-boggling, but at the same time, it excites me, because I'm like, man, if this is what we have to look forward to, if this is what we have to also embrace as the days go by, as we see more and we get more revelation of what fallen angels have really been up to, what type of tech they've really built, what this different speciation of aliens have really done. Honestly, it might sound weird, but I'm really excited, because we have never seen anything to the likes of what we're about to see. But also with this, like I said, with this tech, most of us don't know. Most of us don't know what really is out there. And honestly, I can't, besides what I've already described, I can't wait to see more. I don't know what more looks like. I'm I don't want to say I'm terrified, but I'm kind of apprehensive, because we know for a fact that it has nothing to do with good intentions towards us. So I think it's just a matter of, like, just being in much prayer, and also just being ready, but also not being ignorant about what's really out there and really going on.
Well, I think I really like the word speciation from this podcast. I really think that's what when I'm thinking about this episode, that's where my mind is, right? Because maybe some speciation of spiritual beings do need to travel. They do need technology. Maybe Lucifer, being a cherubim, he doesn't need technology to travel, but maybe angels do, which are a lesser species, and human beings and angels are very close, we know from this show, and that's why we were able to breed with each other.
Right.
So
we also know that the angels walked into Sodom as well.
How'd they get there?
Yeah, they didn't they didn't just appear or materialize, right?
Yeah. We know there are different speciations of angels, because the Bible describes that. I mean, when you read Ezekiel,
seraphim and cherubim, and
right. So we know that for a fact. So I really do believe there has to be different speciations of aliens as well. There would have to be, because the way people have described, just based off encounters,
insectolins, the reptiles, the grays.
Right.
I mean, we've heard those three on our show alone. So
as far as the speciation goes, I think it's true, 100% true. Specifically when it comes to reptilians, which is not a conversation a lot of people do have or have been having.
Let's have it. Yeah, let's have it, Kevin.
Well, I bring up the technology side of it because what I think the deception is going to be, this technology comes from other galaxies and it's traveled all the way here. When I think you can read the Bible and say, what is a chariot of fire? Really? Sounds like a UFO.
That's the wheel within the wheel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe this technology, them traveling in these things, it's always been going here. And Tim came on our show and said that's how they landed on Mount Hermon. They came down in their ships, parked their DeLoreans, opened up, grabbed the ladies, and that's how this whole thing started. Is that they traveled here and they dazzled us from day one with their technology. Because you imagine a primitive human being.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we learned the technology exists. This is where we finally. This is like them getting off ships and handing us iPhones, and we're like, "Oh my goodness!" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Imagine going into the rainforest right now and handing some primitive person an iPhone and saying, "What do you think?"
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would look at what we're doing right now and be blown away. Can you imagine?
They'd probably give you their women, Nate.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine what it was like for that moment on Mount Hermon when human beings and these higher entities finally mixed, and what they told us, what they showed us? I mean. Everything changed from that moment on.
Yeah.
So I think the technology stuff is just it's an important conversation to have because a lot of Christians they think the tech side of it is just smoke and mirrors. It's just a deception. I'm like, no, they actually have technology. Just they build stuff like we build stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like
mm-hmm.
we're not so different, you know.
I think that's hard. I think that's hard to wrap for the most part. And I don't want to use the term layman believer, but just for the sake of our conversation, I'm gonna use it. I think it's hard for like the layman new believer to grasp that concept, or even like a seasoned believer to grasp that concept, because the Bible and how the Bible has been taught for the past 50 to 100 years has been devoid of the supernatural in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like grasping the concept of fallen angels, let alone grasping the concept of fallen angel technology. Well, what do you mean fallen angel technology? You mean why would an angel have to create anything? Why would an angel have to do anything so crazy like that? And so for them, it would be kind of like, no, you're lying. Like you need to just stay with the Bible, stay with scripture. Don't go beyond that which is written. You know, that's
right.
You know. And so it's just one of those things where I really do believe that where we're at in our culture today, Christian, but I say specifically Christian culture, is that we are too enamored by good preachers and speakers, and we do not have the capacity to sit down and actually critically think about what really has been going on in the world, what really has been going on around us, what's been really occurring in ancient cultures that will make this culture look like, you know, we're like, use the analogy, like we're living in the jungle, so to speak, you know, because if you think about it, ancient cultures who have been encountering fallen angels or have had some type of interaction with fallen angel technology we're much more advanced than we are right now. And so if you really think about why it's hard for most Christians to grasp that concept, is because we have gotten a Christianity today that has no concept of how devious Lucifer has been in the last millennia, how serious he takes deceiving people into hell. And to the point where, he has no problem deceiving us by making technology in such a way where we're so enamored by that rather than enamored by the true, authentic gospel, the true, authentic supernatural occurrences and experiences that people have had in ancient civilizations thus far. And so I honestly do think that culturally speaking, in Christian culture, it's exactly that. We're much more used to popular preachers and, you know, popular pastors preaching their messages rather than actually teaching the full counsel of scripture. And, you know, we end up with what we end up right now, what we have right now, you know.
Well, I think it's a good point. It's interesting. It's always the promise of the enemy, right? It's like it's fame and it's power. Yeah. It's bow down to me and I'll give you the cities of and ultimately it's technology. If you think about like the ancient world, if you had the best weapons and the best tech, you had the most power, and that's been the promise always. And I don't think that changes in generation to generation. I don't think it's going to change now either. I think it is that impartation. We look at the pyramids. We talk about the gods of Egypt. We talk about the things that they imparted in that golden age. And I think when you said we're in another golden age, I do believe that. I do believe we're seeing the quickening in technology from our grandparents. My grandmother, who was born before television,
right?
You know, and before cell phones, and still uses a rotary dial phone at her house at 90 years old. You know,
let's go, grandma.
Yeah, I mean, think about what she's seen. That's a generation, and now we've got AI and nanobots and all the crazy stuff.
I think some of the part of the problem is some of the ancient people, like things you would have to spend a whole lifetime proving to exist, right? Nowadays, you'd have to write thousands of books just to try to get some people to accept and adopt a very basic understanding of what the ancients just knew.
Yeah.
It's like a tribe of Indians who knows Bigfoot is real. Why? Because they've had hundreds of years of interactions with this creature, and nobody debates it amongst the tribe if this Bigfoot creature is out there.
Right.
They talk about it as a matter of fact. And so what I think the ancient people understood is they had the spiritual species delineation, but the problem, I think, is that we use terms like spiritual beings. I don't think they use those words. I think angels were so much like human beings, they got aroused.
Yeah.
Think about that. They got aroused by our women, and then they were able to.
Nate. It's a family show.
But it's like they weren't spiritual beings. They were like, you know, they probably were just taller and more attractive, but they were right there. You could touch them, you could feel them, they could interact with us. And we look at it today, modern, like spiritual beings. And I think that's just a bad term. Like, I understand why we use those terms, right? But I think they're not good and helpful to get our minds to think, because I don't think Native Americans are like, the spiritual Bigfoot comes out of the woods. It's like, no, he came out and he like stole my dinner.
Yeah.
You know, like give me my dinner back, Bigfoot. You know, it's things like that where we just have a really bad way of thinking about all these things.
Yeah, and I think it goes back down to just bad teaching, you know. And so, like, I remember when I first heard these terms and heard these concepts, I realized, man, I've been mistaught. You know, I've been wrongly taught about these subjects, or matter of fact, I haven't been taught about these subjects at all. You know, and so when we talk,
is that by design, you think?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely by design, because when you look at some of the terms, even some of the terms in the Bible, like how Genesis 6 is taught, right? And the different interpretations of Genesis 6, like the line of Seth, you know, and then actually having to believe a specific interpretation and have that interpretation be taught in all Christian colleges and schools. And then having that train of thought being aligned with a specific doctrinal train of thought, like Calvinism, et cetera, you know. And so we have been dealt a really wrong and bad hand theologically, because now there's only one interpretation, and this and the stuff we're talking about is only now coming to, I would say, the focus, the center focus of being popular, because for the past 100 years it hasn't been popular, you know. And so it's just one of those things where it's like the concept of talking about angelic beings as being anything other than just spiritual, that they actually had bodies, you know, glorified bodies, that they actually had bodies that apprehended and looked a lot like our bodies. It's kind of like mind blown, but it's also like way over your head, because for the most part we haven't. How many churches have you ever been to where you've had a sermon being taught to you about angelic beings or the purpose of angels, or the
Well, Heiser says that most of the academics only get one lecture, not even a class, a lecture.
One lecture, yes. And I went to school to learn about theology, and 2/3 of the stuff that I'm talking about now, I was not taught in school. And I left school for that reason, because I realized I was being mistaught, and I was paying a whole bunch of money to be mistaught, you know. And so I realized I had to, much of my education I had to learn just from books, just straight buying books, listening to conferences, going to conferences, and sitting down and actually being hungry for the stuff that we're talking about right now. And I'm grateful for all the opportunities to just sit down and just learn from other men and learn from other women who have actually done the hard work. But honestly, to go back to what you're saying, Nate, is that the whole issue is that we haven't been taught, and it's been purpose. It's been by design. It's been by design as to why people just can't have conversations about stuff like aliens or stuff like angels.
Yeah.
You know, because it's been purposeful.
Speciation. I keep thinking that. What do you think DNA plays into all this? Because I think DNA is a huge part of how you should read scripture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think when I read it, I just thought, you know, why is there so much emphasis on the line of Jesus and what, you know, exterminate these tribes of people, you know, wipe them out. Like, because I was, you know, one of the guys we're bringing on was talking about transhumanism, and I see threads even today on Twitter of like, your God is mean. He commanded your, you know, in the Old Testament to wipe out these tribes. And you're like, they probably weren't even human. Like, we have no understanding of the DNA part of scripture. What do you think about DNA in the modern day? And like, what is Christ's blood really? And what are some thoughts about just the DNA side of
honestly, it lineage? I mean, when you look at the lineage of Christ, I mean, you look at the opening of Matthew and then you look at Luke, there is absolutely no way you can say that God doesn't take lineage seriously, because he does. And lineage has a whole lot to do with DNA, because that's bloodline. And so when you look at Genesis 3, I mean, what was the curse of the serpent? The Lord told the enemy, he said, well, I'm going to crush your head by the seed of the woman. The seed of the woman is going to crush your head. And so we see from jump, like just from the very first book, the 3rd chapter, that lineage was going to be the utmost important thing all the way down to Revelation. And so when you just stay specifically with the lineage of Christ and you find out, okay, well, Genesis 6 then makes a whole lot of sense, because it was about lineage. It was about wiping out the lineage, or the seed of the enemy, and also trying, we know what he was trying to do. He was trying to pervert the seed of man. And so now you have this I think L.A. Marzulli has his book, and it's called, I forgot what it's called. It's about the chess. It's about checkmate or something like that, where the Lord has a move and then the enemy has a move, and they're trying to counteract each other. And so that's what we're seeing in the biblical text. We're seeing a fight of lineage, a fight of bloodlines. And when you read the story of Abraham and the 12 sons of Jacob, you find out that, well,
the cosmic chess.
That's what it's called. And when you see the lineage of the men that God chose, they're not perfect men, but they're men who had to do the job to carry on the bloodline of the Messiah. And we know that the enemy also knew that. And he did whatever it took. Whenever you read scripture, from the destruction of the Hebrew boys in Egypt to the corruption of Herod trying to kill the newborns when Jesus was born, we know that all those things were very specific and by design purposeful acts of destruction, trying to get to the bloodline and to destroy the lineage of the Messiah. Honestly, you also can't come to that conclusion unless you have the understanding that that's exactly what Genesis 3 and Genesis 6 were about. It was about a bloodline. It was about trying to corrupt the bloodline and pervert it.
And one of the things we talk about on our show is that these giants, they were around, you know, so the early explorers in America were writing reports and accounts of seeing them. They were fighting them. They were building mounds here. It wasn't too long ago. And I think that ancient people could understand this biblical story, because it's like, their grandparents might have killed giants, literal. And, you know, David and Goliath, and he's fighting giants. So people didn't have a problem believing. They were just trying to survive for the most part. And so there's this DNA war going on today. And I'm sure you hear it and you think about it all the time with the political space, is like, it's the bloodline since day one, and they're still doing it today.
And you know, it's kind of with the whole wacky tacky thing. It's also really strategic, because you know that the enemy's playing his hand and he's not doing it very wisely. He's slipping up, messing up, and pretty much stumbling all over the place, because the whole issue with the wacky tacky, what does that do really? It corrupts. It corrupts your genome. It corrupts your DNA. That's really what it does. And so we see the same tactic from Genesis being played out currently right now in the political realm, and nothing's changed. Like, nothing has changed about it at all. I mean, when you look at what's going on today in the past couple of days at the World Economic Forum, the CEO of, can I say Pfizer on here? I don't want to like destroy your podcast.
Say Fizzle.
Yeah. The CEO of Fizzle comes out and he starts talking about how, you know, there will be nanobots and these new ingestible pills, so that you can tell the authorities know right away after you ingest it, so that you can know. So it's like,
Wait. For compliance.
Yeah.
Out of their mouth. For compliance.
Yeah, for compliance. For compliance. Word for word. That's exactly what he said. Why in the world would you want to do that? Like, unless you had a ulterior motive to corrupt some type of gene that human beings, especially those who are born again, truly have. And it's not conspiratorial anymore to go that route and say that that's exactly what's going on, because we know that's exactly what's going on. They're coming out and telling you that's exactly what's going on. So DNA and the whole concept of bloodlines is more biblical than we could ever possibly imagine. That if we were to now deny that as a biblical fact, I would dare say that you will just as much as deny that the blood of Jesus, which is the same thing that not only covers us and washes us and purifies us, is not good enough. And that's really what they want you to admit. The only reason you would want to take something like that is if you really, really don't acknowledge or understand how important the shedding of blood is for the remission of sins, but also how important it is to purify and to make one clean. And that's really what this stuff is about. It's about perverting the bloodline. It's about corrupting the seed of man. And like I said, the tactic of the enemy, it hasn't changed at all. It's the same tactic, same plan, just a different generation. Same plan, just a different generation. Same plan, just a different generation. Same plan, just a
Yeah, and the blood of Christ puts you back in the family of God.
Yep.
It is as much of it's a physical conversion as much as it's a spiritual conversion. I believe that we are reclaimed, and something that we've learned a lot on our show is that human beings, just being made in God's image here on earth, have a lot of authority. And they have to manipulate in and out of our ability to rule here. And so in some ways, this stuff remains behind the veil because we have authority here. And every once in a while, we'll see behind the curtain. And then that wakes people up. And it's funny that you say this, this episode, is that it's almost like some of the woke modern Christians are on the bottom of the totem pole of awareness. They're literally below even the ancient alien crowd and the cryptid crowd and the ghost chasers. And all these people are way higher than like probably 3/4 of the church.
Yeah, it's
which is so weird.
It's true, but that's because they're too busy trying to be politically correct. They want to be accepted by the world, and that's the exact same thing that the Lord told us would never happen. The world will never accept you. As a matter of fact, they hate you. But the church today is too busy trying to be accepted by the very same people that hate them, so much that they're willing to completely throw away all forms of doctrine and all forms of scriptural literacy to just find some type of relevancy and culture that will never happen. It'll never happen. The church will never be relevant to a culture that doesn't even want it to exist.
Preach. Jesus said that they'll hate you on my account.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is what we talked about. I think I was talking about this early on, that like, it's because of the corporatizing of the church and its dependence on finance that it bends to culture.
Yep.
Instead of shaping culture to look like Christ. And that is where I think maybe that's where the enemy's been most effective is in derailing the Western church.
Yep.
Whether it be via academia and politics, probably those two things most of all.
It's almost as if he's setting it up to get the most of the church to be deceived, because I think what he really wants.
Well, that's prophetic, right? Isn't that, Nate? That's what we see, is the whole church will be deceived at the end.
There are two Jesuses. The churches that are huge in our society, we know who they are. It's almost like they're serving the god of this world, which is Satan. I used to think growing up in the church that we're all praying to the same Jesus, and now I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Serve God or serve mammon, right? It's pretty specific.
Yep.
But how could some of these nonprofit organizations be so massive in the name of Christ if Christ himself says they're going to hate you on my behalf? It's almost like the church has always been underground.
Yeah.
It's always been, it's never been something that the masses have adopted. And so if the masses are adopting some idea or some entity or some person, you have to be skeptical because wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, does the Catholic Church really pray into Christ?
Yeah.
Are they? And I don't want to, I don't want to get all like judgmental. It's just, you just have to scratch your head and be like, who's really behind?
It's not even just the Catholics. It's just like the church in general.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're just the biggest nonprofit organization in the world.
Sure. Yeah.
They're way bigger than the Western Christian
Yeah.
Church, So you just have to, that's why I bring it up, because they're the biggest.
I think it's just one of the things where, like, when Paul was writing in his letters to the Thessalonians, he said that deception would happen when people no longer love the truth. And I think it's 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where he says they no longer accept the truth. And I really do believe that that's where we're at culturally, where people are no longer accepting that which is true. And so the church is too busy. When the church is too busy trying to be culturally relevant, issues like what we're seeing going on with transgenderism or LGBTQ stuff, or whether or not it's, critical race theory or whatever the likes may be, truth is no longer something that's been elevated. And it's funny, we're talking about a culture who loves love. And when you read 1 Corinthians 13, it says love rejoices in the truth, verse 6. And so it's just, we're just at a time where if you really love the truth, you're going to search for the truth, and you will always inevitably find Jesus. He'll be smack in the middle of it because he is true. And so I really just believe the church they left the love of the truth. They left the love of Jesus to just go and find the love of the world, to be relevant, and just to try to win souls. For the sake of winning souls, you end up just subjecting to falsehood. And that's where the church has been. The church is at right now. I do believe that there will be a remnant even within the church that'll just say, you know what? No, I want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I'm going to find it. And that's why we have, like I said, this podcast is great. And I know that's what the Lord's been doing and blessing it. And that's what the Lord's been doing and blessing what I've been doing on IG and other platforms. And it's just, we're just at the hour where we're seeing a whole lot of people leave traditionalism, right? The traditional idea of church teaching. And they're just saying, well, there's got to be more to this, because I'm having these encounters. I have so many people message me and say, hey, I left the new age. And, I realized that this was wrong. I realized that was wrong, or that was just odd. And, I stumbled upon this podcast, or I stumbled upon you, or I heard something from Blurry Creatures, and so that's how I found your podcast. Really, that's how I found your podcast, because someone asked me like, hey, like, have you heard of Blurry Creatures? I'm like, Blurry who? Like, what? And then started listening to your stuff. I said, oh, these guys know what they're talking about. They have Timothy on, L.A. Marzulli, they have Michael Heiser. And I'm like, these guys know what's up. And so, like I said, this generation is thirsty. The church is in for a ride, but I really do believe that honestly, God is going to keep blessing what we're doing, because we just see the signs of the times and we just know what to do. And that's just sound the alarm as loud as we can.
I love it. Yeah. Thanks for coming on our show. And I'm glad all these avenues, they mix match. Everyone's promoting each other. And I think we just did Tim's conference here in Nashville, and it was crazy to see, it was finally, we were a podcast, and we've kind of come out of the metaphorical podcasting woods and actually meet people, and it was just crazy to see how many people they are wanting truth more than ever. And we just sit in our basement and podcast sometimes. We don't even know who's listening or what it's doing to people. And I do know, just to go back to the Catholic Church thing, I just wanted to say, like, we just know that the deception is going to come in the form of a religion, right? And so what not better than come in the biggest one, right? Yeah. And we know that the waters are going to be muddy. It's going to look and smell like the real thing. I'm not saying everyone out there is praying to the false Jesus or anything. I think there are a lot of people who are in parts of these churches, and they are praying to Christ, but I don't think that they're aware that there is this whole other, the waters have always been muddy, and you just have to be very, very careful, because like you said, the deception is huge. So tell us where people can get involved with you, can banter back and forth, and what are your plans, and what are some things you got going on?
Definitely follow me on Instagram at KingCat 2.0. If they allow you to type in my whole name, you got to type in my whole name because the shadow ban on Instagram is for real. It's crazy. But I'm also starting a YouTube channel, another one. And so I'll let everyone know how to find me on that one as well. But definitely follow me on Instagram. I post every day, whether or not I show up. I post every single day to beat the algorithm because the algorithm does their best to try to suppress as many people as they possibly can. And definitely I'm one of them. But every day, I'm working on some new stuff with YouTube. YouTube is still the second largest search engine in the world next to Google. And so it's until there's another larger search engine coming up, I'll be using YouTube. And I probably might be starting a podcast soon. I don't know. I don't know if it'll be as big as Blurry Creature.
Let us know. We'll get you back on and talk about reptilians, and we'll promote that brand new podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, we appreciate it, man. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, we need more and more people yelling and trying to wake people up and get them to just to ponder ideas that angels and humans could get together long ago and create all this chaos. Like just basic ideas that sound fantastical, but they're true.
Yeah.
It happened, and we have proof that it happened and evidence that it happened. And you can open your eyes to the blurry world. And appreciate you for coming on and sharing Blurry Creatures to your fans.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll definitely let me know when this podcast gets played so I can share it with as many people as I possibly can, because it needs to be heard and listened to far and wide. I have so many people who love you guys. I share you as much as I possibly can. Whenever I see you guys on, I'm
appreciate you, man. Yeah.
I love what you guys do. I pray that God continues to bless it and that, you guys get shared far and wide. Maybe Blurry Creatures will be bigger than Joe Rogan soon.
We'll take it. Wow. I mean, we'll take it. I don't know.
We definitely feel like, just to have any kind of sword in the fight is nice. It's cool. It's cool to be like, every day I wake up and it's just make as much content as possible.
Yeah.
And spread the truth as much as possible, no matter what comes at you.
Content that matters. People right now, they no longer want the fluff crap influencer stuff. Like they want real, and stuff like this is real. And that's why so many people are gravitating towards it, because it's real and it's raw. And I really and that's one of the reasons that Joe Rogan does so well. It's because he's just real and he's raw.
Yeah.
He might not be a believer. He might not have any type of like foot in the understanding of things that are spiritual, because he's clearly not a believer, but he's just real and raw. And when you have real, raw, and then you have real, raw faith, forget it. Like that, it'll draw all types of people who are in the dark to the light. And so that's why I'm so excited with what you guys are doing.
Well, thanks, Kevin.
Thanks,
appreciate it, man.
Yeah. All right, love you guys.
Yeah, we appreciate it,
bro. Hey, I found you mid show. The algorithm didn't beat me. I found you and followed you mid show. So you can type in that King Cat, you can find him.
Yeah. And let us know when you got your next creative project going.
Oh, definitely.
We'll have you back on the show.
Oh yeah.
And if you see anything blurry or hear anything blurry, man, you're always welcome.
You guys will be the first ones who will know if I see anything blurry crawling around.
Thanks, Kevin.
Peace out, guys.
All right,
all right, see you, brother.
All right, buddy.
See ya.
That was awesome.
It was.
It's just fun to have a conversation sometimes and not have to
teach,
get into specific
election.
teach.
Yeah, no, but it's a ton of insight. It's always fun. I mean, we talk about this all the time, Nate. Like, one of the coolest things about this space is the community around it, and the community of truth tellers and those seeking the truth. We have an amazing community of Blurry Creatures. We had a members chat last night. We've gotten the really cool chance to be included in a community of people that are really pushing the truth out there, whether it be guys like King Cat here or the Jed Burtons, Doug Van Dorns, Derek Gilbert, Tim Alberinos of the world that are there on the front lines. And it's a little humbling to be trafficking in this space and to be a part of that community. And I think it's something that you and I don't take lightly, or we're not unserious people here. Even though we like to have fun.
We didn't know we were.
Even though we like to have fun and joke around, we are serious people.
Well, yeah. But it's just sad that we didn't realize how much of a spiritual war you're in.
Oh,
right. And then you do a podcast like this, and you're like, oh, we are in the the war. We are, and then you start pissing things off when you do start becoming useful.
Things start breaking.
Start breaking. Yeah. But we love these guys that come on Instagram and humble and they're just truth seekers. People like Amy and Kevin and Kara, and just random people that are like, hey, I'm just gonna say how it is. And I like them more sometimes than just these household names. It's nice just to talk to a normal person and be like, what do you think? What do you think's going on? What are you seeing? Because like us, we get these emails and these links all day long of content and information, everything from, there's a white ice wall in Antarctica to Hillary Clinton's a lizard to who knows what, right? And you don't know how to make sense of it all. You can't believe it all, but you wonder when you get all these links all day long, like, well, there's some truth to probably whatever comes our way. Yeah. And you get thrown in this space, and then people are pumped to come on your show. It's like, well, Luke, we didn't. We still want to talk about Bigfoot, and who knew, right?
And then you get guys like Kevin in, and he's just a great feel for what's happening right now, and what people are talking about, and sort of the intricacies of the way these things are all interconnected from a social standpoint. And yeah, man, it's cool. It's cool to unpack things with people that are searching and sifting, and looking for the truth as well.
It's just banging a drum to wake up. Everyone's trying to wake as many people up as possible, and we get it. Some of the things we say on our podcast might not be exactly the way you see it or the exact same thing, but I think we all can agree that there are deceptions out there, and it's better that we're all banging our drums and trying to wake up our friends and our neighbors and our loved ones and our family than it is to just sit there and be like, well, I don't want to offend somebody.
Just memeing. We're just going to meme it all the way.
We're going to
get offended.
We're going to wake you up with memes.
That's right.
We're going to meme you awake because you've been lulled to sleep.
That's
right. So thanks for everyone out there supporting Blurry Creatures and listening to our podcast. If this is your first episode, obviously it's a little more off the cuff. We usually a little different format, but I like it. We've been doing this enough, a couple years now, and so we've heard a lot of weird stuff, and sometimes you have to kind of drip it to people because their minds can't go there. But so maybe go back to our earlier stuff, listen to some of our earlier episodes to help you understand where we are and why we see the world the way we do it now, and love it. Blurry Creatures is it's fun. It feels like we're just getting started, and we're over 100 episodes, so dude,
it's that time.